I have to admit, when I first heard that Benedict Cumberbatch had been cast as Doctor Strange, I wasn't happy about it. All I knew about him at that time was that he played in BBC's Sherlock. Then I saw him in Star Trek Into Darkness, and I thought he was a formidable presence, and that booming voice was very impressive. But given how I felt that that was the worst film of 2013, well, it tied with Thor: The Dark World, I didn't give him much more thought. Then I decided to watch Sherlock because I kept hearing great things about it. And after that, I was like, that motherfucker can play whoever he wants to play. I officially became a Cumberbitch. Cumberbatch had me locked and loaded straight away into this movie, where we see him as a brilliant neurosurgeon, Dr. Stephen Strange.
No, I have a very strict rule against dating colleagues.
Oh, really?
I call it the Strange policy.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad something's named after me.
His American accent is nearly flawless. I thought that was going to be a problem as well. And he commands the screen. I enjoy these opening scenes establishing him as a character. But before you know it, bam, he's in a car accident, his hands are crushed, and the story enters the second act. And I was like, no, I want to see more of this guy. I want to get to know him a little better before moving into the next act. But no, we're whisked away to Nepal, where Strange seeks unconventional treatment in what looks like the Jedi Academy based on the outfits and the training scenes. But before he goes off to Nepal, he has a bizarre encounter with Benjamin Bratt, who sets him on his path to the Far East. This meeting gets a callback in a credit scene, but neither scene makes much sense. And once again, just as we're getting to know this broken and humbled Stephen Strange, right away he's casting spells. Yeah, he's not great at it, but we never see him get any instruction, deep involved instruction on how to do it at all. It's as if anyone could walk up in there and become Harry Potter in just a couple days. Just like in the first act, I was getting used to the stark contrast between the arrogant physician and the now beaten down pupil, but we're not given any time to digest it. Literally, there's like a cut between scenes and he's already beginning to cast spells. Having said all that, the strength of this movie lies squarely on Cumberbatch. Once he puts on those robes and sports that goatee, he becomes Doctor Strange. I'd say of all the actors portraying Marvel characters, his Doctor Strange stands apart and unique as looking nearly exactly like the comic character. Yeah, they did some costume design changes. The cape is not as pointy just because it probably wouldn't look that great on screen, but he looks amazing as Doctor Strange. The problem I had is that this Doctor Strange is written way too jokey for my tastes. He's like the mystical version of Tony Stark. Yeah, it's good to inject some humor into the character, but Doctor Strange, at least the one I used to read, and I'm going back to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, he was a very contemplative, stern, measured, and serious character. Way too much of a jokey personality in this Strange. I kind of think of Chris Evans as Steve Rogers, who is a no-nonsense character with the right amount of jokes. Well, I wanted more of that out of this Doctor Strange. It would have been a nice contrast to the arrogant, flippant neurosurgeon in the early part of the film. I also never got a sense that this Strange was ever clearly skilled as a mystical practitioner. In all the fight scenes, I never felt like Strange should have been able to hold his own, because we never see him do anything formidable other than open portals for the most part. He has some cool moments, yeah, but his cloak does more ass whooping than he does. Since we're talking about that cloak, yeah, it was cool, but I thought Strange had too many jokes, so I really didn't need jokes coming from a damn cape. There's one scene where he defeats a bad guy pretty convincingly, but he cheats in a really, let me just say, a really shocking manner. If you've seen the film already, you know what I did there. I'm talking about a fight scene that takes place about midway through the film in a hospital. I was bored throughout that entire scene because the whole thing was played for humor in the hospital room. This fight scene reminded me of the fight scene in Superman 2, where it was played more for laughs. Whatever. Okay, so I gotta ask this question. And without giving too much away, it just struck me as odd that Strange gives up on Western medicine because it fails him with trying to fix his hands. So he goes to Tibet and learns that he can still do great things with his hands. So why does he go back to relying on Western medicine twice? Once when he gets injured, and a second time when a companion gets injured. Seems like a mystical wound might require mystical healing instead of the medicine he turned his back on at the beginning of the film. So why does Doctor Strange, who's been exposed to the mystical miracles that he encounters, decide to go back to Western medicine and rely on Western doctors? The answer is you include an unnecessary hospital scene to justify Rachel McAdams' paycheck with more screen time. But anyway, I found the last act to be somewhat boring, and this is a mild spoiler. There's a lot of time bending and looping, which has always been problematic for me. Put it this way. Once Superman rotated the Earth backwards in time in the first Superman movie back in '77, undoing everything that happens in the movie, doesn't it remove any suspense or tension that a conflict is supposed to create? If I know that the hero can rewind time again and again, how can I ever accept any conflict involving the hero if I know he can just go back in time until he gets it right? Also, this movie skirts the line of doing another Iron Man 3 stunt. That is, introducing a villain and then undermining the villain completely. And I'm not talking about Caecilius, or however you pronounce that name, Caecilius, whatever. He barely registers as a villain in this movie. Initially, his quiet, cadenced speech makes him seem menacing, but as it goes on, you realize, nah, he's just a lame villain. He's not that interesting. I mean, he's badass, but he just doesn't come off as very threatening. Now, on the flip side of the coin, there's another bad guy who appears in the last 20 minutes or so of this movie, who is a major character in the Doctor Strange universe. And this character is completely wasted here, rendered totally incompetent, so much so that if they decide to bring this villain back in a future film, you'd have to wonder to yourself, why? Because the villain was so easily defeated in this movie. The reveal of this character was so poorly done and was just a complete and utter waste. I should mention that there are two credit scenes, neither of which are very compelling. The first one solidifies a prominent Marvel character as merely being a punchline at this point, and the second scene sets up a character in this film who looks to be a new threat to Doctor Strange in a future film. But I just didn't care about that after seeing how they squandered a much more powerful, much more interesting villain at the end of this movie who could have been an awesome character in a later film. And that's another problem with this movie. A lot of this film, at least from the second act on to the end, feels like setup. There's a lot of standing around and talking and explaining about the mystical realm and how some of these characters have turned away from the teachings of the Ancient One. We'll get into that later. And I understand you have to do a lot of exposition because this is kind of some mind-boggling stuff, some psychedelic stuff here, but it just seemed like a lot of setup, and there was a little bit of that Marvel formula where you can just feel this film is just like a cog in a greater picture leading up to films to come. Without question, the appeal of this movie lies in the performance of Benedict Cumberbatch. Even though I thought the character was written with way too much humor, Cumberbatch is awesome in the role. If nothing else, then he looks exactly like the character in the books. The visual effects are mind-blowing. The opening fight scene set the tone. It was totally badass. The effects will draw comparisons to Inception, but they take it to the next level. If not for those positive elements, I'd give this film 2.5 reels. But as it stands, I'll bump it up half a reel. By the way, they make the effort in this movie to point out that the Ancient One is Celtic. But you know what? No matter how you slice it, that's total, and that's the martini.